The year is 1982. Atari is on top of the world and they're just throwing buttloads of money at Steven Spielberg as they try to cement a deal to acquire the rights for E.T., the video game. So while Atari is dealing with that soon-to-be landfill of a mess, a company who had made quite an impact during the Pong clone era is quietly building an Atari killer. A console that will put the Atari brand to shame. Something to truly let gamers know that the second generation of consoles was here and it was going to kick ass. So go ahead, Atari. Go ahead and just throw those millions upon millions of dollars at Steven Spielberg while this company right here slowly works on a release of a little console. And thus, the Colecovision was born on this day, July 28th, 1982. As early as 1979, President of Coleco, Arnold Greenberg, had wanted to get into the game programmable market after seeing the success of the 2600 and wanting to move past the Pong home console era, cause that market was getting a little crowded. Eric Bromley, who was lead engineer, had come up with a drawn spec sheet for a console system, but the cost for materials and components, mainly RAM, was still too high to move forward with that idea. Once the price of RAM finally started to drop, Greenberg gave the go-ahead for the console to be created. Both of them came up with the name Colecovision to be chosen as the name of the new console. Let's fast forward to 1982. This here was the Atari killer. At least on paper it was.
Now you can bring the arcade experience home. Introducing Colecovision, the most advanced video game system you can buy. It plays more games than any other system. Arcade games with multiple screens like Donkey Kong. Arcade games like Saxon with its three-dimensional look. Adventure with 15 different screens. Cosmic Avenger. And Colecovision's new Smurf game. Coming soon. Colecovision's first expansion module that lets you play all the Atari VCS compatible cartridges. Now you can bring the arcade experience home because your vision is our vision. Colecovision.
It had a Zilog Z80A CPU that ran at 3.58 megahertz. That's not a typo there, folks. You heard me right. 3.58. Wow. It had a whopping 1 kilobyte of main RAM and 16 kilobytes of video RAM. It's insane. 1 kilobyte? That's like 1,000 bytes. The resolution was 256 by 192 to take advantage of that awesome TV technology we had back then. And it had a palette of 15 colors with one being transparent? Wait, what? On the screen it could produce 16 simultaneous colors. One per sprite. And speaking of sprites, it could handle up to 32 sprites. 4 per scan line. I mean, I don't even know what to do with one sprite, much less 32? Wow. And if that wasn't enough, it boasted 3 tone generators and 1 noise generator in full, glorious mono. Let's be real though, as a kid, all we cared about was the games and what they looked like, and if they were fun to play. And in order to play those games, you needed what? Controllers. Unfortunately, the controllers are considered mostly crap. I don't know why, but once the second generation of consoles started, companies decided we needed tons of more buttons to cope with the amazing graphics and expansive gameplay possibilities. Yeah, right. Can you imagine if we went with that ideology, adding more buttons every new console generation? Exactly. The controllers in this generation like to use overlays for the numeric keypad, and the Colecovision was no different. The problem is that the overlays were easy to lose, and sometimes even the overlays were not fully compatible. For example, the overlays for the Super controllers would not work with the regular Colecovision controllers, and vice versa. Yeah, nice going there, Coleco, thanks a lot. The numeric pad is also a bit stiff when compared to the Intellivision controller as well, but at least it has this going for it. It's not as bad as a 5200 controller, cause that thing sucked. The ColecoVision also had many peripherals, or expansion modules, as they called them, released in its short lifespan. I'll get to them as the video goes on. But all that power would be useless if there's no good games for it, so let's take a look at some of the games for the ColecoVision and see if all those amazing specs were put to good use. Now I'm going to start off with the original launch titles, the games that came out at the beginning and also the ones that came out eventually throughout 1982. And the first one here is Donkey Kong, of course. Coleco saw what the arcade conversions could do for sales after Atari bought the rights to bring Pac-Man home. I mean, that title alone helped move 10 million Atari 2600 units in 1982. So of course, Kaliko wanted to tap into that opportunity. Bromley traveled to Japan to see if they could acquire the rights to some Nintendo arcade games. Eventually, Bromley came into contact with a Donkey Kong arcade cabinet, which was still unreleased to the world. He immediately knew that this one would be a huge seller. He approached Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi in the hopes of getting full rights to the game for the ColecoVision. He thought he had acquired the rights to the game, but he did not have a formal contract. This came back to haunt him. On CES 1981, he comes to find out that Yamauchi had given the rights to Atari. With some savvy business tactics and maybe a little bit of luck, he manages to get a formal contract from Yamauchi for Donkey Kong. So that one becomes the packing game for the ColecoVision. Remember those times when consoles came with packed-in games? How times have changed. Anyway, this version here is as close to the arcades as you got in 1982, especially when you had these versions as your comparison. A friend of mine had it and I was just blown away to how close to the arcade it felt. I recalled I asked my parents for a ColecoVision. My dad got me the Odyssey too. Bless you, Dad, you tried. Next up is Carnival. From what I can tell, the only difference between the arcade and the ColecoVision is the resolution, which causes the screen layout to be much larger on the arcade. Other than that, it's a pretty faithful arcade port. I kept wondering what it is that the ducks take from you when they swoop down. I had to look it up in the manual online. Bullets? The ducks eat bullets. Why? Why would they do that? Would have been fun if the next level had ducks shooting back at you like Galaga after eating all those bullets. That would have been pretty cool. Cosmic Adventure is a side-scrolling shooter that has some real choppy animation when compared to the arcade, but overall, it's a fairly adequate port. You could shoot missiles as well to hit the enemies on the ground, but my god, what is up with those colors?
They've gone to plaid!
Next up is Ladybug, another game by Universal that was ported to the ColecoVision. This one here is a near perfect port too. I never played Ladybug until I started making this video. And I gotta say, it's very interesting and it's a unique take on the Pac-Man concept that was so popular back then. What the heck is a ladybug eating anyway? Flowers? Are those flowers? Well, the manual says dots, but you know what? I like flowers. I'm gonna go with flowers. Makes more sense. If you've never played this game before, give it a try. It's actually fun. Mousetrap by Exidy is another interesting Pac-Man concept. You play as a mouse trying to nab cheese in a maze, but there's tons of cats around the maze trying to stop you. Yeah, don't you hate when that happens? Luckily, you got a weapon at your disposal. That red X, which is not actually a red X, it's supposed to be a bone. You can collect them and use them to turn into a dog, allowing you to eat the cats? That's kind of messed up when you think about it. Anyway, what is unique is that you can use the power-ups when you want to. You don't automatically turn into a dog. And that's actually a pretty interesting take. You also got doors that you can use to alter the maze, like in Ladybug. From time to time, you also get a hawk that can swoop down and eat you, even if you're a dog. You collect all the cheese and you go to the next level. A very fast-paced and accurate port of the arcade, right on the ColecoVision. Smurf Rescue in Gargamel's Castle is the first non-arcade port listed here. It was made by Kaliko and it was made to showcase what the console could do. The graphics were praised for being cartoony and close to the Saturday morning cartoons for that time. It's a pretty basic side-scrolling platform with little enemies, but it was a game that young kids could enjoy while entertaining the slightly older crowd as well. It's a staple title when bringing up any ColecoVision themed conversation. Try it out, you might like it. Turbo was a racer by Sega. This here was another arcade port. The scaling effects may seem choppy, but you have to remember that this here was released in 1982. Gamers then were not used to seeing something like that in a home console. This right here is a very simple racing game. Try to pass as many cars as possible to advance. The only thing that truly gets irritating, at least to me, that droning of the engine is just horrendous. No music, just the sound of the engine and the beeps as you pass other cars. If you had the cool expansion module too, or the steering wheel add-on, I can imagine this was an awesome experience to play this game with that module back in the early days of the 80s. Next up is Venture, another classic arcade title from Exidy brought over to the home market. This one is an overhead adventure game where you travel into rooms and battle enemies in order to get treasure. The trick here, other than not getting hit by the enemies, is not to touch the enemies ever. Even when they die, they can still kill you. Different rooms have different enemies. The ColecoVision is very faithful to the arcade and almost nothing was lost in translation. If you had bought a ColecoVision at launch, you had to be feeling pretty good about yourself in 1982. Saxon here is the last game released in 1982. Another arcade port from the soon-to-be masters of the arcades, Sega. The port of this game is really amazing for its time. Very little was lost in the conversion and it is a great game to play whether it's in the arcades or the ColecoVision version. This one here is one of those games that I was actually afraid to play in the arcades. I was not good at it and I knew if I played it I would lose a quarter real quick. The altitude change and the isometric view is what makes this game exceptionally challenging, even to this day. Only now, I don't lose a quarter in the process. In all, over 120 games were released for the ColecoVision. They went all in on converting many arcade ports to the console right off the bat, as they try to capture market share away from Atari. I won't go over every single title released for the ColecoVision, but here's a quick rundown of a few more well-known titles for it. The Super Controller was another module that was compatible with some games such as Super Action Football and Rocky. The Roller Controller was another option that was used for games like Slither and Victory. There was a module that also allowed you to convert your ColecoVision to a full-fledged Atom computer. I mean, That must have been so badass. I mean, how many consoles can you convert into a full computer? And to take it one step further, Coleco released the first ever fuck you in gaming history. What is that, you ask? Well, this module pretty much flipped the middle finger at Atari. A module that allowed you to play 2600 games on your Colecovision without their permission. Now, naturally, Atari took Coleco to court, and somehow they were able to settle this out of court, with Coleco becoming licensed under Atari patents. This also applied to the Gemini game system, which was that Coleco standalone system that played Atari 2600 games. How the hell did they get away with that? It's like Atari could do no right as they headed towards 1983. So the ColecoVision was on the right path. It had the power to take Atari down with its console. The arcade ports were pretty damn good for that time. You could turn the ColecoVision to a full-fledged freaking computer, adding more capabilities to the console. Oh wait, that's not enough for you? It could play 2600 games with a simple add-on. There is nothing, I mean nothing, that could have stopped Kaliko. Oh son of a, you gotta be kidding me. You gotta be kidding me. So there you have it. That is the ColecoVision, the Atari killer, the highlight of the second generation of consoles. A console that unfortunately had a very short lifespan due to the massive crash of 1983, and it left the market with plenty of potential. So what was your experience with the ColecoVision? Was it during its initial run? Or maybe you got your hands on it years later on one of those, flashback re-releases? Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this short little flashback on a great console. Keep watching, keep gaming, and as always, take care of yourselves. The ColecoVision might be responsible for the Nintendo we got today. How so, you ask? Just sit back and let me share this little trivia with you. The Famicom project chief manager Takao Sawano actually bought a ColecoVision and was so impressed by the graphical capabilities and smooth gameplay that this was the bar set by the Famicom team when designing their soon-to-be game console. They wanted their system to surpass that style and gameplay. Now you think the 2600 add-on was bad enough? That's not the only thing Coleco did to screw Atari. Although this incident I'm about to mention here was unintentional, maybe? You see, after Nintendo released the Famicom in 1983 in Japan, they had set their eyes on the US for wide market exposure. During that time, Atari was still the dominant force in the gaming market here in the US. Nintendo was looking for a way to market their Famicom in the States. Both companies eventually came to an agreement, but nothing was set in contract. Atari would help distribute the Famicom using their distribution channels and vendor knowledge. But during the CES of 1982, Atari management saw Donkey Kong being played on an Atom computer. Now you might be saying to yourself, so what's the big deal? Well, Atari had exclusive rights to distribute Donkey Kong on their computers, meaning no one else could. So when they saw it playing on a competitor's computer, they were livid and saw this as a breach of contract by Nintendo. Atari backed out of the deal, and the firing of Ray Kassar the following month didn't help at all. The deal to help Nintendo distribute the Famicom in the US was pretty much dead in the water. At that point, Nintendo decided to bring out the Nintendo console on their own here in the States. Funny thing is that the Donkey Kong that was seen by Atari management during CES was actually the ColecoVision version being played using the Atom add-on module. To think that the gaming landscape could have been so much different if not for one small misunderstanding. Or maybe it was intentional? I mean, if I was Coleco and I found out about a console trying to make its way into the US market, I might do something to sway opinions and screw up contract talks indirectly. Wink,